They think he's unconscious, but he's hearing everything. In the most isolated wing of an elite hospital in Aspen, Colorado, a 38-year-old man lies motionless in an ICU bed. Heart monitors flash in silence. Machines beep in rhythmic tones, as if counting the seconds for a presence that seems in no hurry to return. Subscribe to the channel and help us grow. Like, comment, and share. It means a lot and motivates us to keep bringing you more enchanting stories. The patient is Elijah Moreau, heir to one of the world's largest luxury and wellness resort empires, a name surrounded by prestige, wealth, and now, mystery. Outside the glass window, two familiar figures approach. The woman's voice is low, calculated, cold like the winter in the mountains. The man's voice is hesitant, tense. "Are you sure he won't wake up?" he asks. "With the right dosage, no. And even if he does, he won't last long," she replies. They don't know. Elijah is awake. He hears everything. 2 days ago, Elijah was driving alone along a mountain road, returning from a retreat at one of his family's own resorts. They say he lost control at a dangerous curve. They say it was an accident. But there was something about that moment, a snap in the brakes, a whisper in the back of his mind, that didn't quite fit. When he opened his eyes, he was already in the hospital, surrounded by familiar and unfamiliar faces. And that's when he made a decision. He would pretend to be unconscious. He needed to understand what was really going on. And more than anything, he needed to survive. For the first 48 hours, Elijah remained completely still. A discipline of body and mind, rooted in years of meditation and Eastern techniques passed down through the philosophy of his family's resorts. Every second was a test of endurance. But listening was his only weapon. And what he heard changed everything. Whispered conversations, rushed instructions, the sudden absence of his trusted lawyer, Lucas Chang. Then the new will, hastily written. Medications that made his body feel heavier with every passing hour. The suspicion grew like a thick fog inside him. Something was deeply wrong. And the conspiracy had a face, that of his stepmother, Margot Moreau, and his half-brother Victor. Margot had always been too charming to be trustworthy. Widowed by Elijah's father, she maintained a facade of elegance and care, but hid an ambition that grew in the shadows of the Moreau empire. Victor, his stepbrother, had always been emotionally distant, cold, observant, always waiting for a place that never came. Now, Victor and Margot together were trying to erase Elijah from the story, slowly, chemically. But they hadn't counted on one variable. Elijah wasn't alone. That morning, a new nurse walked into the room, Clara Bennett, a last-minute replacement. Her hair was tied back in haste, her gaze too alert for someone meant to care for an unconscious patient. There was something in her presence that broke the icy monotony of the room. She spoke to him. She touched his arm with respect, read his vitals as if searching for answers beyond the numbers. And Elijah felt it. Clara wasn't like the others. As the coma charade continued, the tension kept building. His family's visits came laced with poison disguised as concern. The doctors avoided giving details. Medical records seemed altered. But Elijah remained still and more alive than ever. Because now, he had a purpose. To find out who tried to kill him. To prove he wasn't crazy. And to find a way to rise again, not just for revenge, but to reclaim the future they were rewriting without him. The game had begun, and no one suspected that the silent pawn lying in that cold bed was, in fact, the most dangerous player in the room. Before becoming the discredited man in a hospital bed, Elijah Moreau was the face of a dynasty built on balance, silence, and well-being. His name graced international magazines. His signature sealed billion-dollar projects. His image symbolized a legacy where luxury met spirituality. The Moreau Wellness Empire wasn't just a chain of resorts, it was a lifestyle. With devoted followers, celebrity clients, and a philosophy promising full reconnection between body and mind. Elijah had grown up between retreats in Bali, meetings in Zurich, and meditative hikes in Japan. His father, Daniel Moreau, was a visionary, and also a difficult man. He demanded perfection. He raised Elijah as an heir, not a son. After Daniel's sudden death, Margot, the enigmatic stepmother who had entered the family late, inherited partial control of the company, sharing responsibilities with Elijah. Victor, Margot's son from another man, was slowly introduced into the business's backstage, as if he too were part of the legacy. But Elijah had always carried the true weight of the crown. And now, there he was, motionless. Inside a private wing of the most sophisticated hospital in Colorado, with panoramic windows overlooking a postcard-worthy snowy landscape. The room was quiet, but there was no peace. The place seemed carefully chosen. Luxury, privacy, and total control over who entered and who didn't. Outside, a discreet medical team. Inside, hidden cameras, a plainclothes security guard, and medical records that were quietly altered without notice. On the night of the accident, Elijah had been returning from a humanitarian conference held by the group's foundation. He had chosen to drive himself, something rare. His assistants offered transportation, but he wanted time alone. There was something bothering him, a sense that something in his surroundings was off. The company numbers matched, but some of Margot and Victor's movements raised red flags. And then, the curve, the sound of metal crashing into stone, the world flipping, and then, darkness. When he woke up 2 days later, he was surrounded by machines, his mouth dry, limbs heavy, and the strange sensation that someone wanted him exactly like that. It didn't take long to realize he was being kept there, not for medical care, but for convenience. And in that moment, he made the most important decision of his life: to pretend. Driven by pure survival instinct, Elijah sank into a performance that required every ounce of mental control he had learned over the years. His body, inert, his gaze, vacant, no reactions. But inside, his mind was racing. He listened, he stored, he observed. A nurse changed his sheets. A doctor signed papers without explaining the contents. And the visits always with too many smiles, too many promises. Victor spoke as if Elijah were already dead. Margot touched his hand with the cold detachment of someone testing the temperature of a cup before taking a sip. Time felt elastic. Each day brought new clues. Notes mysteriously erased. Medications administered off schedule. Strange reactions in his body that pointed to something stronger than a simple sedative. And Elijah knew. If this went on much longer, he wouldn't be able to keep pretending, because his body was beginning to truly fail. The game he started could become a real sentence. That's when Clara arrived, the nurse replacing the head nurse. No warning. Little background, but sharp eyes and steady hands. There was something about her, a compassion that defied protocol. She looked at Elijah like he was still there, like she believed there was life behind that silence. And for the first time, Elijah felt hope. He wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, Clara was the key to dismantling the lie before it consumed him completely. The following days became a test of endurance. Elijah remained motionless, but something within him stirred. Time was no longer passive. Every minute was precious, a new chance to capture fragments of conversation, identify patterns, spot cracks in the carefully constructed performance of those who wanted him gone. Margot's visits became more frequent, always brief, always calculated. She arrived too perfumed, with flowers that were too exotic, and words that were far too sweet. But the moment she thought no one was listening, her voice changed, cold, sharp. She spoke on the phone or with Victor in whispers, but Elijah heard everything. They were worried about timelines, documents, signatures. They spoke of speeding up the process and securing the transition. Victor, nervous. Margot, in control. It was during one of those visits that Elijah first heard what sounded like a death sentence. If his condition stays the same for 3 more days, we can move forward with the guardianship. The board will approve. The medical declaration is already being prepared. Guardianship. It would declare him legally incapacitated, make him a prisoner, not just of his body, but of the law. If that happened, control of the entire Moreau wellness empire would fall into Margot's hands, at least temporarily. Long enough to dismantle the legacy, erase any trail, and ensure Elijah never had a voice again. That night, he didn't sleep. He couldn't. He was at war. A silent war. No weapons. No allies. At least, that's what he thought. Until Clara returned to the room. Footsteps light, but eyes saying more than any medical chart. She was uneasy. Something didn't add up. During the night checkup, she lingered longer than usual, reviewed his vitals again, touched Elijah's arm with a light squeeze. Then she said, almost to herself, but loud enough for him to hear, "Something's wrong here. It doesn't add up." The next morning, Clara showed up earlier than usual. She asked to personally handle Elijah's bath and medication. Her eyes scanned him closely, as if waiting for the smallest movement, a blink that would shatter the illusion. And for a brief second, he almost gave in. But it wasn't time. Not yet. That's when things began to change. Clara started carrying a notebook in her coat pocket. In it, she wrote notes that didn't appear in the hospital's digital system. She recorded subtle changes in breathing patterns, small shifts in skin color, pupil dilation. And the more she observed, the more questions she had. During a shift change, she asked a colleague about a new sedative added to the prescription. She was ignored. The answer? Orders from above. That same night, Clara came into Elijah's room after hours. No lab coat, no protocol. Just her, a chair beside the bed, and silence. She sat down, crossed her arms, and looked at Elijah with quiet resolve. "If you're in there, and you can hear me, I want you to know I believe you. I don't know what's happening yet, but something about this isn't right, and I won't ignore it." Elijah felt his heart race. The next morning, she returned more confident. She began reviewing all records since his admission, found inconsistencies in schedules, duplicated doses, manual changes with no justification. Clara wasn't just an ethical nurse. She was someone who had lost too much in life, and maybe that's what made her so intolerant of injustice. With time, her gestures became more deliberate, more intentional. When adjusting the sheets, she pressed Elijah's hand lightly. During checkups, she spoke to him as if expecting a reply. And slowly, Elijah began to test. A slight twitch of the finger, an involuntary contraction, small signals. Clara noticed them all. And in that room where everything seemed frozen, the truth began to breathe. Something was taking shape, a silent connection between two worlds on the edge of collapse. And for the first time, Elijah knew. He had an ally. The hospital operated like a silent clock, lights dimmed at 10 sharp. Visiting hours ended at 8. The hallways stayed cold and empty until the graveyard shift took over with slow steps and hushed voices. But that night, Clara stayed longer than usual. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of fear and resolve, when she entered Elijah's room after her shift had ended. She carried a tablet with restricted access to medical reports, hidden under her coat. She closed the door carefully, sat down beside the bed and let out a long sigh, like someone preparing to do the unthinkable. She gently touched Elijah's hand, as she always did. He responded with the slightest movement of a finger. She saw it, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "I confirmed it. They've been keeping you sedated with doses that should have been stopped over 72 hours ago. This isn't treatment, it's containment. And the records are being forged." Clara slid the tablet onto the bed, displaying an open medication administration log. A red highlighted line showed a powerful drug, midazolam, being administered in a continuous dose. The protocol, however, required suspension by day 5. Elijah was already on day 8. His heart rate increased. Clara noticed. "They're building a case to justify your incapacity. It's a plan, a careful and cruel plan. In the previous days, She had observed how the changes in the system seemed to have been made by someone with administrative access. That ruled out most of the staff. There was only one explanation left: orders from the top, from someone with influence and power. Clara had suspected it all along, but now she was sure. And what frightened her the most was how everything felt orchestrated, without rush, without noise, like a silent drowning. That night, Clara decided she couldn't wait any longer. She began speaking to Elijah frequently, testing responses, gently touched the tips of his fingers with a cold swab, turned a small flashlight on and off near his eyes, observing the slightest reactions. Elijah responded as best he could. Subtle contractions, a nearly imperceptible movement of his left eyelid. Signals, communication. Clara began recording everything in her personal notes. She no longer trusted the hospital's system. She saved short videos on her own phone whenever there was a reaction. She started hiding notes under Elijah's sheets, testing simple codes. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. Move a finger if you agree. And just like that, like building a bridge over an abyss, they established a secret channel of trust. One silent night, Clara overheard a conversation outside the room. 2 staff members were discussing a DNR order, do not resuscitate, signed by a doctor Clara had never seen on shift. Strangely, the form was already printed. That could mean only one thing. They were preparing to let Elijah die. The next day, she saw Victor speaking with the hospital director in the private garden of the VIP wing. His expression was tense, gesturing like someone pushing for deadlines. Clara didn't approach, but enough was said out loud for her to hear. The longer he stays like this, the more risk we face. We need to end this, soon. Clara ran back to the room, her hands shaking. But Elijah was waiting, eyes fixed on the ceiling. She came close and, for the first time, spoke directly, without hesitation. I know you're awake, and I'm going to get you out of this. I just need you to trust me. And for the first time, he moved his head, a tiny gesture, almost imperceptible. But to Clara, it was as if he had shouted. Right there, in the middle of a carefully staged lie, the truth was born. The conspiracy was real. And now, it was no longer Elijah against the world. They were in this together, and that changed everything. The silence of the hospital, once a shield for conspirators, began to shift into a territory of resistance. Clara and Elijah, now bound by a silent alliance, turned every small gesture into language. His eyes searched for hers with more intensity. His fingers, once lifeless, responded with subtle purpose. Their communication was basic, but it worked. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. A slight twitch of the left hand to indicate urgency. Clara wrote everything in a notebook hidden behind sterile supplies, inside the storage cabinet. Every night after her shift, she returned to Elijah's room pretending to be just a visitor. No coat, no protocol, just presence, and a plan in the making. They started building a visual vocabulary. Clara drew small symbols on scraps of paper and hid them under his pillow, waiting for reactions. An envelope, 1 blink. A stethoscope, nothing. A signature, 2 blinks. She documented patterns, measured response times, cataloged involuntary versus intentional movements. It was more than technique. It was complicity. Clara knew she couldn't prove anything alone, not with enough weight. She needed hard evidence, something that couldn't be erased or discredited. That's when she made her riskiest decision yet. She installed a micro camera inside the lamp base in Elijah's room. Tiny, nearly invisible, Bluetooth connected to her phone. Every shift, she checked it, repositioned it, made sure it was hidden. The hospital had strict rules against recording, but this wasn't a clinical environment anymore. It was a battlefield. And the first footage began to speak for itself. Victor came in one night with a thick envelope. He spoke in hushed tones, but the camera captured enough. The director will sign. The paperwork's ready. We just need the final report. After that, we apply the protocol, and that's it. The next day, Clara took her phone home, watched the footage with her heart pounding, and saved it all to an encrypted drive. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was proof, and with proof came urgency. Elijah, on his end, seemed more present. His responses grew stronger, his blinks became firmer. He moved his hand with more control. Sometimes Clara caught him looking at her with a focus that went beyond gratitude. There was life in him. There was fight. One night, with only the sound of the infusion pump breaking the silence, Clara leaned in and asked, "Do you trust me?" He blinked once. "If I find help, are you ready to come forward?" Another blink. "Yes." "Even if it means they'll try to destroy you?" A long pause. Then, a third blink. "Yes." That's when Clara made her move. She needed someone outside that corrupted circle. Someone who knew Elijah. Someone outside Margot and Victor's radar. One name came to mind, Lucas Chang, the lawyer who had mysteriously vanished after Elijah's hospitalization. Rumors said he had taken a leave. Others whispered about health issues. But Clara suspected something deeper. She just needed a way to find him. Meanwhile, the danger was escalating. Margot began appearing outside of visiting hours. She spent more time at the hospital than the doctors, brought documents, made phone calls inside the room, ignoring the nurses entirely. She spoke as if she already owned the place and Elijah's life, and he, in silence, watched her, with eyes that now knew too much. That night, Clara returned to the room, locked the door, and said in a quiet, firm voice, "You're not alone anymore. I promise. The truth is getting out of here with us, and they have no idea what's coming." From the other side of the bed, a single tear rolled down Elijah's face. For the first time, he wasn't pretending. It was real emotion. Because finally, there was hope. The night fell upon the hospital with its usual silence. But inside Elijah Moreau's room, time was no longer passive. Every second was calculated, every movement choreographed with precision. Clara knew she could trust no one but Elijah. And he, no one but her. The silent alliance they'd built was no longer just about survival. Now it was strategy. That night, Clara arrived earlier than usual. In her hand was a small black case, the kind used to store stethoscopes. Inside, a new micro device, a high-sensitivity audio camera, smaller than a coin. She carefully placed it under the chair cushion, where Margot always sat during visits. The angle was perfect, discreet, and well hidden. The goal was clear. Capture, without any doubt, the true intentions behind the family's fake concern. Elijah watched it all. Clara had explained with brief notes that the previous footage had revealed enough to raise suspicions, but they needed more. A full plan, articulated, with names, motives, and, if possible, a verbal signature. It was risky, but necessary. That same night, Victor appeared, alone, as if trying to avoid Margot's imposing presence. He spoke softer than usual, but his eyes betrayed anxiety. He sat in the chair, exactly where Clara had placed the camera, and began to whisper, as if speaking to a dead body. "I just want to say I didn't want it to be like this. But you left us no choice, Elijah. It was always you, the heir, the favorite, everything yours. I just wanted my place. She said it would be quick, said no one would suspect, that you'd just not come back. But you're still here. That's starting to scare me." He stood up, ran a hand across his face, and walked out of the room without looking back. Clara, watching everything from the portable monitor in her car in the hospital parking lot, closed her eyes and took a deep breath. That was what she needed. A thread of truth spilling from the mouth of a direct accomplice. She couldn't waste any more time. The next morning, Clara used her time off to go after Lucas Chang. After hours digging through Elijah's old email archives, she found an address in Boulder, 3 hours away. She got in the car and drove without hesitation. When she arrived, she was met with suspicion. Lucas looked worn down, distant, like someone forcibly removed from an entire life. But when Clara showed him the videos, something in him shifted. They said Elijah had suffered irreversible brain damage, that he wasn't coming back, and that I needed to step away to not interfere with legal procedures. They put me on forced leave and blocked my access. Now it all makes sense. Lucas didn't waste a second. He retrieved old documents, reviewed wills, and confronted the changes made in recent weeks. Margot and Victor were preparing to execute a forged DNR, using the guardianship as legal cover. The plan was simple: erase Elijah under the illusion of legality. But now, with Clara's recordings and evidence, they had something the Moreaus hadn't anticipated: proof. That night, Clara returned to the hospital with Lucas disguised as a visitor. They went to Elijah's room. Lucas approached, moved. "Elijah, if you're still in there, I swear we're getting you out of this. They've gone too far." Elijah blinked. Once, then again. Clara smiled. He was with them. And in that moment, something changed. It was no longer just a promise between nurse and patient. Now there was a third bond, an experienced lawyer with a hunger for justice. A new chapter was beginning. The conspiracy had finally been formally uncovered, and the truth, now fully armed, was ready to fight for its freedom. The following days were a whirlwind of controlled tension. Clara, Lucas, and Elijah now formed an invisible triangle, connected by signals, evidence, and strategy. Everything had to be meticulously planned. A single misstep, and the entire effort would be swallowed by the powerful machine Margot controlled behind the scenes. Time was against them. And the shadow of the forged DNR crept closer by the hour. Clara intensified the evidence gathering. With Lucas's help, she began transferring all video and audio files to a secure, off-site data repository with multiple backups. Any attempt to erase them would be in vain. Now, they had undeniable records. Victor confessing his involvement, Margot referencing the guardianship paperwork, and most importantly, clear documentation of Elijah's conscious reactions, completely contradicting the diagnosis of an irreversible coma. The climax came on a particularly quiet night when Margot entered the room with a new visitor, the head of the hospital's neurology department. Clara, already prepared, pretended to step out for a break, but left the camera feed running, connected directly to Lucas's phone outside in the car. Margot was impatient. She sat in the chair, crossed her legs, and spoke not as someone asking, but commanding. "Doctor, we need to proceed with the DNR order. Everything is ready. The signature is just a formality." He doesn't respond, doesn't react. He's been vegetative for days. There's no doubt anymore. The doctor hesitated, glancing at Elijah. "And if he responds?" Margot cut in. "He won't. I guarantee it. Let's finish this. The board is already aligned. You just need to follow protocol. Do what's necessary. Quietly." Her words were clear. Clara, hidden and watching through Lucas's phone, recorded everything. And at that moment, they knew they had what they needed. Margot directly instructing a medical professional to sign Elijah's death warrant, even while acknowledging the chance he could respond. Their game was exposed. Lucas compiled a legal dossier the next day, transcriptions of audio, videos, altered medical reports, and Clara's independent records proving Elijah's neurological responsiveness. He included documents from before the hospitalization, showing the will had been modified without his original attorney's presence. This wasn't just a conspiracy. It was an attempted murder disguised as a medical decision. But they knew it wasn't enough to hand everything over quietly. Margot had too much influence, too many connections. The strike had to be public and undeniable. That's when Lucas proposed the boldest plan of all, a public appearance by Elijah. Legally, no one could prevent a conscious patient from speaking. And the only way to crush the lie was to let Elijah prove he was not only biologically alive, but conscious, lucid, and ready to speak. Clara, though worried about his physical condition, agreed. So did Elijah. Through signals, he made it clear he was ready. In secret, they prepared everything. The medical staff loyal to Margot was removed due to a contamination outbreak announced by Lucas, who secured an emergency court order to isolate the ward. They replaced the nurses, withdrew the sedatives, and within 48 hours, Elijah was breathing on his own, his eyes steady, his fingers responsive. On the third morning, Clara helped him sit up for the first time. He trembled, he was sweating, his voice still wouldn't come, but his eyes said it all. He was there. Lucas took his hand. Clara, beside him, cried quietly. And for the first time since the accident, Elijah Moreau took a deep breath, lifted his gaze, and even without speaking, declared, "I'm back." The day of the revelation began with a tension so thick it seemed to hang in the air. The hospital, once silent, felt like it was holding its breath. The cold walls that had witnessed manipulation, fear, and resistance now contained the beginning of something irreversible, the reclaiming of power by someone believed to be lost. Elijah Moreau was brought into the hospital's conference room with Clara and Lucas at his side. His body was still fragile, his speech limited, but his mind was sharper than ever. He wore a simple shirt with no symbols of wealth or status. He didn't need them. His presence spoke for itself. Every step was a declaration. He was still alive, still the owner of his story, and now, of the truth. Inside the room, a small group of journalists, secretly invited by Lucas, waited. There were also hospital board members, summoned by a court injunction. What no one expected was Elijah's triumphant entrance, and even less what he was about to reveal. Clara connected the projector to her laptop. Lucas stood ready with the legal documents. Elijah sat before them all, scanned the room with eyes burning in silence, and when everyone expected words, he simply raised his hand and gave a signal. Clara hit play. On the screen, Margot appeared, sitting in her usual chair, instructing the doctor to apply the false DNR. Her voice was clear, her tone commanding. Then came Victor in his solitary confession, saying he never wanted it to be this way, and that she promised no one would suspect. Faces paled, murmurs filled the air. Then, silence. Lucas stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just seen is not merely an immoral scheme. It's a premeditated attempt at murder. My client, Elijah Moreau, was kept sedated, falsely diagnosed as incapacitated, and nearly eliminated so his family could seize control of his inheritance and his empire. But he survived, and now he demands justice." Reporters flooded the room with questions. Hospital board members exchanged stunned looks. Denial was impossible. The evidence was all there, the videos, the altered medical files, Clara's records. Everything pointed to one undeniable fact. Elijah had been the target of a conspiracy, and he lived to expose it. At that moment, heart racing, eyes wet, Elijah leaned toward the microphone. His voice was hoarse, faint, but firm. "I was there the whole time. I heard every word, every plan. I saw death approaching in silence, disguised as care, but I chose to resist. And today, I choose to live." A reverent silence fell over the room. Clara held his hand. Lucas lowered his head, overcome with emotion. The impact was immediate. The media reported the story as a national scandal. The Moreau conspiracy headlined every news outlet. Margot and Victor were summoned by the courts, investigated for fraud, attempted murder, and document tampering. The hospital launched an internal audit and suspended the medical leadership involved. The very system meant to protect patients had been corrupted, and now it would be exposed. But for Elijah, the real turning point wasn't the scandal. It was something more intimate. When the last film crew left the hospital and the cold lights of the cameras went dark, he looked at Clara, still sitting by his side, and said with difficulty, "You brought me back when no one else believed." She smiled, eyes filled with tears, and replied, "You were never alone. You just needed someone to truly see you." That night, Elijah was moved to a regular room. No surveillance, no secrets, just him, Clara, and the soft sound of rain tapping against the window. For the first time in weeks, he slept without fear, because now the truth was free. A year passed since the day Elijah Moreau regained his voice and revealed to the world the truth they had tried to bury with sedatives and lies. The scandal that followed dominated headlines for months, turning the story into a symbol of resistance and courage. Margot and Victor Moreau faced justice with every resource money could buy, but the strength of the evidence was undeniable. They were convicted. The Moreau wellness empire was returned to its rightful heir, but Elijah was no longer the same man who once led spiritual retreats surrounded by luxury. He rejected the spotlight, stepped away from the presidency, and announced that his priority would now be something else, protecting those who have no voice. That's how the Bennett Moreau Foundation was born, a name chosen by him in honor of the woman who not only saved his life, but reconnected him with everything he had forgotten how to feel. The foundation had a clear mission: to investigate and expose cases of medical negligence, legal abuse, and hospital manipulation, while also offering legal and psychological support to vulnerable patients. In no time, it became a national reference. Elijah used his influence to open doors, but it was Clara who carried the soul of the project. The love they felt for each other could no longer be hidden, and they began living a quiet life away from the cameras. They moved to a secluded property on the outskirts of Santa Fe, New Mexico, a wooden cabin surrounded by red hills and silent trails, filled with indigenous art and simple objects. There, they found a home they didn't need to hide, where they could walk hand in hand without looking over their shoulders. Clara, who had spent so many years between exhausting shifts and the loneliness of hospital corridors, could finally breathe. Elijah, who had lived surrounded by conventions, boards, and contracts, could finally listen to his own heart. They built a simple life: fresh coffee on cold mornings, evening walks, stories told by the light of the fireplace. One afternoon, while walking a lesser-known trail, Clara mentioned how much she loved that place. She said she felt safe there. Elijah smiled, took her hand, and continued in silence. A bit further ahead, beneath an old tree marked by lightning, he knelt down. Clara, confused, tried to help him up, thinking he had stumbled. But then he pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside, there was a handcrafted silver ring set with a turquoise stone, local, shaped by a regional artisan. "You believed in me when no one else did. You saw me when the whole world was burying me. You brought me back, and now I don't want to take another step forward without you by my side." Clara brought her hand to her mouth, surprised. The tears came before the words. When she finally caught her breath, she said simply, "I'm already yours." But yes, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. And there, beneath the shade of that quiet tree, the two sealed not just a new beginning, but the end of a journey marked by pain, struggle, and redemption. Today, the cabin in Santa Fe is more than a refuge. It's a home where life moves slowly, between books, laughter, and silences that don't need to be filled. Where the memory of what they lived is not a wound, but a scar that binds them. Elijah Moreau is no longer just an heir. Clara Bennett is no longer just a nurse. They are survivors, builders of a new story. A story where love was not the prize, but the path. A story where truth prevailed, and where finally, after everything, a new beginning was possible. And so ends the story of Elijah Moreau and Clara Bennett, a journey of silence, conspiracy, courage, and love. If this story held you from beginning to end, take a deep breath, because there's so much more to come. Here at Enchanting Stories, we live to tell tales that give you chills, move your heart, and sometimes make it beat faster than an ICU monitor. So, if you enjoyed this narrative and want to keep traveling with us through surprising stories, subscribe to the channel right now. It's just one click, but for us, it's like saying "I do" at the altar. Oh, and don't forget to leave that powerful like. It helps this video reach more people and keeps the channel alive, healthy, and free of any Margos. Now tell me, From which charming city are you watching us? Drop it in the comments. Who knows, maybe someone from your town is here too, and you'll end up becoming story friends. The Enchanting Stories community is growing with every chapter, and you're part of it. So you know the drill. Hit the bell, share with anyone who loves a good twist, and come live stories that deserve to be told. Until the next story, traveler of emotions.